So here it is, generations, everybody cutting the end of the ham off, not even knowing why they're doing it, but they're still doing it. Not even knowing why they're doing it, but they're still doing it. Nothing happened some time ago. You may have heard the story, Zig Ziglar made it popular, about the little girl who was in the kitchen with her mom, and she said, "Mom, why are you cutting off the end of the ham?" His mom cutting the end of the ham off. She said, "Well, honey, my mom cut the end of the ham off." He said, "Well, why don't you go ask her?" So she goes to her mom and says, "Mom, why you cut the end of the ham off?" She goes, "Well, honey, my mama cut the end of the ham off too, so you go and ask grandma." Grandma happened to be with him that day. So she goes to grandma. Turns out, grandma cut the end of the ham off, she said, because their roaster was too small. So here it is, generations, everybody cutting the end of the ham off, not even knowing why they're doing it, but they're still doing it. So here it is, generations, everybody cutting the end of the ham off, not even knowing why they're doing it, but they're still doing it. So here it is, generations, everybody cutting the end of the ham off, not even knowing why they're doing it, but they're still doing it.
Man, that is so true. We do things again and again and again just because that's the way it's always been done. And I remember when I was a little boy growing up in a church just like this one, and I had so many questions, you know, why, Mom, why we had to come here every day? Why I can't stay home and watch football? But why that Jesus looks like a white guy and he don't look like us?
Couldn't we at least let black Jesus hang alongside?
Forget it. The only Jesus I know is him, and the one thing he don't need is a partner.
Mama, how do we know Jesus wasn't black? He could have been from the lost tribe of Israel. They were supposed to be black.
I bet they were. If ever people were lost, we're it.
Now just hush up, both of you. This picture has been in my family for as long as I can remember. When I was a baby, I don't know what I saw first. My mama, my papa, or this Jesus. Now, he's the one I know and love, so let's close the subject. Jesus was black, the Bible would have said so.
But it does say so.
What are you talking about?
I read about it. It's in Revelations chapter 1, verse 14. I read about it in Muhammad Speaks. It says, his hair is like wool, and his eyes are like flame of fire.
Well, Lord have mercy. It sure do say that, don't it?
Where are we in the Bible? Why do we do Easter like we do Easter?
Okay. So we're going to go with a little quick common sense question. Okay. Died on Friday, got up on Sunday. How many days?
I'm going to say they're supposed to be, it says 3, but I'm going to say 2.
2 days. Shit, I guess 3, I don't know. Shit.
So according to the scriptures, Christ said that he would be in the ground 3 days, 3 nights. Friday night, the Sunday morning, that's 2 days.
2 days.
Hey, it sound like you're right. Somebody done brainwashed us, right?
Right. I really do believe that because, like he said, I was raised up in church, especially here in the South. We are, what they call is the Bible Belt or whatever. But I was taught that we're supposed to believe that he rose on the 3rd day. But if, like you said, you're doing a type of calculation, and that's not even being brainwashed or whatever. Just in general, you do the calculation. It can't be 3 days.
Can't be 3 days.
Not even knowing why they're doing it, but they're still doing it.
I had to stop and go back and read the word again and see what the Most High intended for us to know. Today, we're going to take a look at that. Sometimes it's just like living in the movie The Matrix. You remember the movie. Neo at his desk sleeping because he's tired from working all night. And all of a sudden, something different happens that wakes him up. Doing the same thing over and over again is a sign of insanity. That's what we do. You ever thought everything we learned in school is not the whole story? Or all the things we learned in church is not all the truth? There's deeper answers, and the answers are in the book. Sometimes things have to happen in life to shake us up and to wake us to look at things differently. You see, we've been conditioned since day one to think one way. We see images every day that look certain ways, and that's intentional. When I was in college, we took a class in psychology called classical conditioning.
Are you really suggesting that Barney spent 6 months commuting back and forth to Hoboken to learn a signature cooking style of a restaurant he doesn't even like, so he could win a bet he hadn't even made yet? Yeah, the whole thing stinks.
No, it's not possible. Okay, I was the one who said, let's go to Shinjitsu. Bless you. How could Barney have... You brilliant bastard. It's all so obvious now. For the past, I don't know how long, 5 years, every time I've said, let's go to Shinjitsu, bless you, you've sneezed. Every time. And little by little, let's go to Shinjitsu. Bless you. You forged the association in my brain.
So what should we do for dinner?
Let's go to Shinjitsu. Oh, bless you. Yeah. Until eventually, yes, I know I said that we'd be back Sunday, but guess what? We are back now. Now, what on earth would... Stop bouncing! What on earth would make you think that we'd be okay with this? Let's go to Shinjitsu. When you were sick for a week last year, I had Shinjitsu like 6 times.
We have been conditioned from day one to think a certain way. What we've been hearing from our teachers, from our church, from our pastors, has been conditioned to make us think this way. Dr. Theron Williams has a real great point of view. Let's listen to him.
Hello, I'm Dr. Theron Williams. I am the president of the Bible is Black History Institute, and I am the author of the Bible is Black History series and the pastor of the Mount Carmel Church of Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'd like to welcome you to the Bible is Black History Institute. And I want to talk with you for a few minutes about the color of Christ. And I know that the color of Christ shouldn't be an issue, but it is. Especially when the color of Christ has become so politicized that there are those who have embraced the white depiction of Jesus, and that his whiteness has become more important than his divine essence. And when you elevate his whiteness above the divine essence, then we have a problem. We don't know what Jesus looked like historically. For all we know, Jesus never sat and posed for an artistic rendering. And if he did, that rendering is lost in antiquity. So we don't know what the historical Jesus actually looked like. We know that iconography of Jesus began to emerge after the 3rd century AD. Those are the earliest depictions that we have of Jesus. And the early church iconography, Jesus iconography, was not designed to capture an accurate historical depiction of Jesus. Rather, the early iconography of Jesus was more to make a theological statement than it was to capture the historical likeness of Jesus. And the historical images of Jesus by the early church around the 3rd century BC and earlier, those AD and earlier, those images were mainly to address at least 3 issues that confronted the early church. Number one, the early depictions of Jesus was a refutation of a dangerous doctrine that floated around the early church world called Docetism. And Docetism advances the notion that God was Jesus on earth. But since God is so holy, since God is so pure, that God is too pure and too holy to come in contact with something as evil, wicked, and debased as human flesh. So the Docetists said that God did come in the person of Jesus Christ, but Jesus Christ was not human. He was 100% spirit, but he projected a human appearance, but he himself was not human. He was totally spirit. That's Docetism. And we see, particularly in the Gospel according to John, some pushback against that doctrine of Docetism in the prologue of the Gospel according to John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. So John is saying, yeah, God did become flesh. And John said, and we saw him. So that was a pushback against Docetism. And so the early iconography of Jesus made the theological statement that this image represents a Jesus of flesh and blood. Because you can't capture an image, you can't capture a spirit on canvas. You can't paint a phantom or a ghost on canvas, only a human being. So the early depictions of Jesus were making a theological statement that Jesus was not just spirit, but he was also flesh. Another function of the early iconography of Jesus was a reaffirmation, not just for a refutation of Docetism, but it was also reaffirmation for the early church community that there was a man in the 1st century from Nazareth named Jesus. This is the subject of our faith. This is the God of our religion. And this is the God whom we worship. And since there were no one around in the 3rd century to have been with Jesus to give a description to the early church of what Jesus looked like, they invented their own images, not to capture accurately the historical likeness of Jesus, but to remind themselves or to reaffirm themselves that there is a person in Jewish antiquity, 1st century Palestine, who grew up in Nazareth of Galilee, who died on Calvary and was resurrected, a human being named Jesus. So they captured their own imaginations of what they believe Jesus looked like, not so much going after an accurate depiction, but for reaffirmation that a man named Jesus lived. And so they captured it on canvas. So it was not just for refutation or for reaffirmation, but it was also a reflection. That is, the early church community invented images of Jesus that captured and reflected the ethnic characteristics of that particular Christian community. So in those icons of Jesus in the early church, it embodied the ethnic physical characteristics of that particular Christian community. So those were at least 3 reasons for the development of the images of Jesus. And as we see this particular image, this was around the 3rd century AD. And as you can see, the image of Jesus here is very dark, which is what most of the images, you see his skin tone is dark, like most of the images of Jesus of the early church. But as the centuries rolled on, Jesus' skin became lighter and lighter in their depictions. And when we get to the Renaissance period, Jesus has turned white. Not for any nefarious or evil reasons, but just like the early church invented depictions of Jesus that reflected the ethnic likeness of that worshiping community, the Europeans did the same thing. You know, their depictions of Jesus were basically a reflection of the Renaissance period church community. In other words, they made a Jesus that looks like them, the way other early Christian communities had done. But what was different about this in the Renaissance period, the great masters of the Renaissance sort of cemented that image of Jesus and were responsible for causing it to go viral because the great masters endorsed it. And one of the great masters was Leonardo da Vinci. And Leonardo da Vinci was a famous artist during the Renaissance period. And Leonardo gave us one of the famous icons of Jesus, the Salvator Mundi. And this is the image that the great Leonardo da Vinci, the great mind of the Renaissance period. And that painting now is worth over $1 billion, the Salvator Mundi. But Leonardo also gave us, among other things, the Last Supper. And that's one of his famous depictions of Jesus and the disciples. And we are all aware of the image of the Last Supper. And we see Jesus here, and we see his characteristics. And there's a story about how Leonardo da Vinci came up with the image of Jesus, with his rendition of Jesus, and how that was influenced. There was a man in his day named Cesare Borgia. Cesare Borgia was the son of the Pope, and he was the general of the papal army, the papal military. And Cesare Borgia hired Leonardo da Vinci to be his chief military strategist and his engineer. Alexander Dumas, the biographer of the Borgia family, argued that Cesare Borgia and Leonardo da Vinci, their egos were so huge that they just couldn't get along. You know, I mean, their egos were so big that they couldn't even be in the same room at the same time. You know, only one ego that big per room. So they parted ways. But Leonardo da Vinci was so impressed with the appearance of Cesare Borgia that Alexander Dumas said that it influenced his depictions of Jesus. And we see this image of Cesare Borgia. And when I first saw that depiction, I thought it was a depiction of the traditional Jesus. You know, I thought they had dressed Jesus up, because you do know that there are some people out there who are saying that Jesus was actually rich, a millionaire. And I thought that somebody took an image of traditional white Jesus and dressed him up to look like a millionaire. You know, I mean, look at that hat. Look at that fabric that he has. I mean, that's expensive stuff. You can look at it and tell. And then I started researching. I said, no, this is not Jesus. Jesus was a poor first century peasant living under colonial oppression in first century Palestine. They didn't dress like that. And so I found out that it was Cesare Borgia. Now, just with the eye test, there might be some credence to Alexander Dumas's claim that this image of Cesare Borgia influenced Leonardo da Vinci's depiction of Jesus. The other great master of the Renaissance was Michelangelo. And Michelangelo did do some paintings of Jesus, but his most famous depictions were sculptures. And we see this sculpture of Jesus holding on to the cross. That's a Michelangelo piece. And then we also see this image of Jesus laying in the arms of his mother, Mary, a dead Jesus. And that was a depiction or a sculpture done by Michelangelo. And when we look at the work of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, particularly those depictions of Jesus, they look alike. It is as if they've been cut from the same template. And even though their work was infused with politics, if you study the great masters, you study their work, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, they just weren't painting pictures and carving sculptures, but they were speaking through their work, politically charged, sometimes challenging the theologies of the early church. But one of the things, even though their work was politically charged, and even though they spoke through their work, one of the things they were not doing was creating these images to advance the notion of white supremacy. They were not doing that. I mean, this whole question of race did not become a thing until the transatlantic slave trade. Prior to that, there was no such thing as race. Isabel Wilkerson, in her book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent, she argues that the whole question of race, white supremacy, and racism, these are uniquely American inventions. So they didn't even exist. There was no such thing as white people or black people. In Europe, they identified themselves not based on the color of their skin, but from their national origin. They were Scandinavian, or they were British, or they were Italian, or wherever they came from. Never called themselves white, identified themselves based upon their national origins. African didn't call themselves black. They identified with their national origin or their tribal affiliations. They were Ethiopians, or they were Egyptian, or they were Nigerians, or they were Kenyans, wherever they came from. No black, no white. That black-white thing started, according to Isabel Wilkerson, in the United States. So race really is a social construct. And that construct began to take shape during the transatlantic slave trade, when the Europeans came over to North America and South America for the purpose of colonizing these distant lands, taking it over, dominating. And they came over with their Christian religion. And their Christian religion was anything but biblically based. You know, they created their own Christianity that had little or no roots in the Bible. But their religion was rooted and grounded in supremacy, giving themselves a basis upon which to build white supremacy, to dominate people who were not like them. And so they came over to the North America and South America. They called it the New World, but it wasn't new to the people who were already living on the continent of North and South America. It was new to the Europeans. So they came over with their religion and with their images of Jesus in tow. And they came over to, quote unquote, Christianize these savages by forcing on them this bastardized version of Christianity along with their white Jesus. And the psychology was, you take our religion and here is our God. This white man right here. Here is our God. And that's your God. And that's the Savior of the world. He died and was resurrected again, and you have to believe him. And not only do you have to believe him, you have to believe what we say about him. Because you can see the commonality. He's white, we're white. And the Word was made flesh and dwelled among us. And the God of heaven and earth decided to come to earth. But when he decided to come to earth, he could have chose any flesh to come in. So he chose white flesh. So that makes us the privileged class. So you have to listen to us. And you have to do what we say do, because we are his representatives. And so they are using this whole question of white Jesus not so much to embrace the essence of God, but to advance whiteness as superior. And so it has gotten to a point where the whiteness of Jesus has become more important than the God essence of Jesus in the flesh. And that has become a problem. And so Christianity, particularly from the far right wing, is actually built on this whole notion of white Jesus. When they talk about he died, that's who they're talking about, white Jesus. Rose again, white Jesus did that. A white man did that. Ascended to heaven, a white man did that. So the innocuous beginnings of white Jesus, as made popular by the Renaissance masters, have become corrupted by this whole effort to advance the notion of white supremacy. And so the image of white Jesus has become one of the pillars of white supremacy. And I agree with Sean King. Sean King said that these images of white Jesus are oppressive and they need to come down. And I agree with the brother 100%. And if Christianity is anything, Christianity is supposed to be a religious faith that embraces truth. Because the founder of the religious movement called Christianity said, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Jesus talked constantly about the truth. He said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And the truth is, we know Jesus was not a white man. Yet, Western Christianity cleave to this white Jesus. We know he didn't look like that. We don't know exactly what Jesus looked like, but we know he didn't look like that. No more did he look like this. And the reason we know he didn't look like this is because Jesus was not a Chinese. The reason we know he didn't look like, we don't know what he looked like, but we know he didn't look like this. And the reason we know he didn't look like this is because Jesus was not Japanese. We don't know for sure what the man looked like, but we do know he didn't look like this. And the reason we know is because Jesus was not an Indian. He was not of Indian ancestry. Well, if we can deduce that Jesus didn't look like these three, why is it so difficult for us to deduce that Jesus didn't look like a European? He was no more of a European descent as an Indian or Japanese or Chinese. Neither was he of European descent. So we can write the other three off without even thinking hard about it. But when it comes to writing off the European rendition of Jesus, now we want to think about it. Because that image has been so ingrained into the world's consciousness that many of us are just convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that that's the image of Jesus, the true image of Jesus. Megan Kelly said, a matter of factly, well, everybody knows that Jesus is white. No, everybody doesn't know that Jesus is white because Jesus is not white. A man that is born in North Africa in the 1st century could never look like that. You know, so we hold on to this image of white Jesus. The church does. I mean, and even in some of our churches, we have depictions up of white Jesus in our stained glass windows. White Jesus in our home. White Jesus. He's ubiquitous. He's everywhere. Around the world. He's everywhere. This picture here is the salmon head. And it was invented by a man named Warner Salmon in 1940. If his appearance doesn't matter, why was this duplicated over 500 million times in the 20th century alone? We're in the 21st century now. They stopped counting. We're in the 21st century now. And that doesn't include the other variations of the salmon head. In movies and in print and on the cover of magazines, this image has influenced the image of Jesus and its acceptance in community, in society, more than any other. There is no other image that has been duplicated more than the salmon head. No other image. And that's religious, secular, whatever. No other image has been duplicated more than the salmon head. Why do you think that's so? If his image doesn't matter, why has this image been replicated so many times just in the 20th century alone? You know, because the Christianity that many of us have embraced, it's propped up, it's built on this white guy. That's why it's so acceptable to so many people, because it's built on the image of a white guy. If Christianity would have begun with the knowledge that Jesus was a black man, like Buddhism, we know what Buddha looks like. You know, we know what he looks like. We got statues of Buddha. If we had statues of Jesus earlier on, and he was a black man, do you think Christianity would have proliferated in the West the way it has? I think not. I think not. I think what boosts Christianity and caused it to blow up is these images of white Jesus. Western Christianity is built on these images. He healed the sick, raised the dead, fed the hungry, dealt with his enemies, died on the cross, rose again, and he's coming back again. And when we talk about that in Western Christianity, we're thinking about this white guy here. That's what makes it so acceptable. That's what makes it so believable to so many people, because it's built on this white guy. And his whiteness is what's important. Not the God essence so much, but his whiteness. And Christianity is built on truth. And whenever we reproduce this image, we are reproducing a lie. Why is it so important for us to hold on to this lie when we know it's a lie? What makes this image so enduring? How come it won't go away when everyone knows he didn't look like that? Why is it still here? Because what's more important than anything is the whiteness of Jesus. And as long as there is a United States of America and Europe and European countries, that image is not going anywhere. It's here and it's here to stay. Yet you have people who are saying that, you know, it really doesn't matter to me. I don't care if he's black or white or orange or purple or polka dot. I hear that so many times. You wouldn't believe it. It doesn't matter. He died for us. And he's the Lord. He's the Son of God. You know, I had a guy to say that to me. I was delivering a lecture, and it was to a mixed crowd dealing with the color of Christ. And I have a Q&A at the end of each lecture. And he rose and he said, well, it doesn't matter. You're being divisive. You're bringing up this color, and it really doesn't matter. I don't care what color he was. He died on the cross for me. He's my Savior. And I said to him, that sounds altruistic, but let me ask you some questions. I said, are you married? He said, yes. I said, is your wife white like you? He said, yes. I said, so you have children? He said, yes. I said, how old? He said, 14, 10, and 7. I said, okay, are they in church? Very active in the youth ministry of our church. I said, let me ask you about your church. Is your church multiracial, multicultural? He said, well, no, it's basically white. We have a few people of color who attend our church, but it's basically white. The pastor is white. The leadership team is white. The official board is white. It's basically white, but we do have black and brown people who attend our church. I said, okay, that's fine. I said, let me ask you this, and I want you to be honest. I said, if I were to give you this image and say to you, if you were willing to put this image on your wall at your house and take your 14-year-old, 10-year-old, and 7-year-old in front of that image and say to them, this is God in the flesh. This is Jesus. He healed the sick. He raised the dead. He opened the eyes of the blind. He fed the hungry. He died on the cross for all of our sins. His blood cleansed all of us from our sins. God raised him on the third day, and he ascended back to heaven, and he's coming back to get us. And we have to live up to his approval. If you want to go to heaven to be with him from now on, you have to live to please him. What do you think your children would say? Would you be able to do that? Would you be able to take this image of Jesus to your official board at your church and have them to plaster the walls of your church with this image? What do you think would happen? In your white church, but you have an image of black Jesus. How do you think that'll work out for your church or for your family? You know, he never did give me an answer, but I did give the brother something to think about. Because when you look at it in those terms, it becomes crystal clear that his color does matter.
At last. Welcome, Neo. As you no doubt have guessed, I am Morpheus. I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
A prison for your mind. Wow. You see, in America, we have a Western theology and we have everything else. But it's just the way of the Bible. Let's take a look.
But we ought to be concerned about what God says. You want...
November 2008. This was the night many people in the United States believed that our nation's long history of racial division had come to an end. We were entering what was optimistically called post-racial America. But in the decades since the American people elected the country's first black president, most of our nation's most complex social issues continue to revolve around race. Why is this such a stumbling block for us? What will it take for us to finally come together? Can the issues of race ever truly be overcome? Or is it just human nature to divide ourselves along racial lines?
There are a lot of people who believe that racism is there, it's always going to be there, there's nothing you can do about it, you know, you are the race you are, blah, blah, blah. And I say, no, this is something we made up.
Wait, what?
This is something we made up.
So if we made race up, what's the story? A closer look at history reveals that the story of race is a story of labor. Most of us were taught that North America was initially colonized by those seeking religious freedom. But in fact, most Europeans, including the Pilgrims, came for land and economic opportunity. At that time, there was no concept of race as we know it. No one identified by the color of their skin, but by their country of origin: French, English, Dutch, Spanish. By the early 17th century, the colony's plantation economy was booming. This created a massive need for cheap labor, a need largely filled by poor European immigrants. Some landowners also used enslaved people from African nations, but at the time, an enslaved person's status was not lifelong. One could gain their freedom. However, in 1676, enslaved Africans joined with European indentured servants in a large rebellion against the colonial government in Virginia. Alarmed by the natural alliance between the indentured and enslaved, the ruling class passed a series of laws that segregated and permanently enslaved those of African descent, while also giving their European counterparts new rights and status. This divide and conquer strategy paved the way for what would become an organized system of racial chattel slavery.
And that was how you kept a system in place, and why you had white people who were poor not challenging the system, because they were sold a bill of goods that somehow whiteness was going to include them in all the benefits of society.
The first legal use of the term white appeared in 1691 in a document created by the colonial government of Virginia, used intentionally to differentiate people by the color of their skin rather than their nation of origin. In 1790, Thomas Jefferson put forth the first U.S. national census, which placed the population into the categories of free white males, free white females, and all other free persons. Enslaved black people were counted as well, but only as 3/5 of a person. Native Americans weren't counted at all. And at its first seating, Congress passed the Naturalization Act, which stated that only free whites could become United States citizens.
You have to be white. That was the first thing they said. The very first thing, you have to be white.
What humans have done is ascribe meaning and difference to skin colors and then use those meanings to create hierarchies. And so when we say race is socially constructed, it's about the ways in which humans have created hierarchies related to racial difference.
The construct of race, as a way to assign value to human beings, became woven into the structures of this new nation, with white people valued above all others. This ideology has been upheld and reinforced throughout our country's history, continually seeking legitimization through pseudoscience, civil policy, and bad theology, all examined through a white lens.
White supremacy is the idea that not only is it great to be white, but it's better than anybody else. It's better than any other color. It is the best. The way that white folks do things, the way that white folks think, the way that white folks do church, the way that white folks write and talk about God, it's better than anybody else.
As a person of color, I notice this when I walk into denominational headquarters, or I walk into seminaries and Christian colleges, and I look at all the important people of that denomination, and they're old white men. And it's telling me that for the history of this denomination, or for the history of this Christian college or university, they believe that the only important people to put up on the walls are old white men. That implicitly is affirming or asserting white superiority.
Whiteness became a culture in and of itself, to be defended at all cost. In the 19th century, Chinese immigrants became another target of racially biased policies.
And because there was this fear that these Chinese laborers were stealing good white men's jobs, as if those jobs belonged to them, this sentiment kind of emerged and swelled and ultimately led to the Chinese Exclusionary Act, the one and only time we excluded an entire group of people from being able to immigrate into our country just based off their ethnicity. The Exclusionary Act starts as a 10-year act, but it ultimately is extended for 60 years.
European immigrants, such as the Irish, Italians, and Germans, were also initially viewed as a threat and were often persecuted. But they had one distinct advantage: they were light-skinned. So, over time, by stripping away or hiding their ethnic heritage, eventually they could assimilate and become white. The United States has been referred to as the melting pot, a metaphor for the fusion of nationalities, cultures, and ethnicities.
I've never really liked the term melting pot because it just means that it's going to become one thing. And so who decides what the one thing is? When you're the minority, that means that everything of yours is lost.
It seems the metaphor of the melting pot, in truth, is a push for white homogeny rather than an embrace of diversity.
My own children are way lighter skinned than I am. And what's happened, I think, even with my children, is that our celebrations and our language are slowly dissipating and disappearing. And I wonder what my grandchildren will be like. They'll be, and I keep thinking they'll be the next white generation.
Today, the concept of race and the structures that hold up whiteness as the norm have become so embedded in our culture that it's extraordinarily difficult for most white people to see the ways they influence life in this country.
Because being white is what's normal, and it's normal for everybody.
It's just what it means to be human. We don't think of it in racial terms.
And so my question's always been like, what is white culture? Let's talk about that. And that's hard to define because really what there might be alluding to is white supremacy.
We don't see the advantages, and we usually only recognize it when we are with persons of color and they get treated differently than us. What we think is as normal is really an advantage.
And the advantages are often stark.
When I served in rural Ohio, we were the only Black family in the town that we lived in. And it was about as challenging as you can imagine. I just had another baby. That was our youngest. So I'm at home and getting ready to nurse. And Benny wants to go for a walk. My husband goes for a walk. takes the two other kids in the double stroller. And as he's going for a walk, he comes right back. I mean, just a matter of 2 minutes, he's right back home. And I said, what happened? And he said, this parishioner, he said, he just tried to kill us. I said, what are you talking about? You know, I'm thinking he's exaggerating. He said he tried to run us over. He drove up onto the curve and he said, it was right after President Obama was reelected. He said, that president is trying to ruin my country and I'm gonna run you out of this town. And proceeded to drive up onto the curve to kill my husband and our two small children.
The American mistake is believing that we are exceptional and different. This is a country that's built on the genocide of indigenous people, that an entire economy is built on the black backs of people who've never been given reparations, and has continued to reinforce those racist structures and systems for its own benefit. And that fault line runs through the entire American experience. This has always been who America is.
Okay, what is the answer? Let's take a look at that. Here's a quote from Marcus Garvey. A people without the knowledge of his past history and origin and culture is like a tree without roots. He also said, if you had no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life. With confidence, you win before you even get started. Let's take a listen to Brother Benaiah Israel in finding out what is the truth about who we are.
The truth. A light in the darkness. A word of restoration. A revelation of who you are. We search for it. We pursue it. Then one day, you find it. You follow it. Wherever it leads. No matter what people say. And you may be surprised just what you may find. And the revelations just may change your life forever. Why? Why do you need to know your identity? After all, there's neither Jew nor Greek, neither bond nor free, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. This, of course, being said after the Jews were persecuted and enslaved by the descendants of the Greeks. However, that aside, the question still stands, Why should one know his or her identity and ancestry? Well, the answer is simple. If you're Israel, then the land of Israel is your land. It's literally yours. The Sea of Galilee, it's yours. It's literally yours. Paid in full and given to your forefathers. It's your property. The River Jordan and the holiest city in the entire world, Jerusalem. It belongs to the Most High Yah and the children of Israel. This includes all the territory therein and all its resources. To deny one's inheritance is to willingly give up your valuable possessions for free and instead lay claim to tiny pieces of land in the places in which you were scattered and pay rent and mortgage to the rulers of the land in which you were scattered. So, why is it important to know your identity? Well, it's important to know what's yours and what's owed back to you. It's also important to know the prophecies which deal specifically with Yisrael and the Messiah and being saved from the lands of your captivity. That's why it's important. Maybe you're wondering, are you saying the Jews are black? Well, that's just silly. Everyone knows the Jews are European. You black people, always trying to claim someone else's history. We know what the Jews look like, and you're not it. After all, it's what they told us, and we believe it. Now, of course, we haven't taken the time to verify or perform any research or ask any questions or read any old books. Come to think of it, we just accepted what was told. Oh, wait a minute. That doesn't sound right. So, one day you get curious and you want to know for yourself. So, you go down to the library and you march right up those steps and you check out an old book on Spain and Portugal, the Jews of Spain and Portugal, to finally determine once and for all who the Jews are. So you open up the old book only to find out, oh, they black. So you take it to your pastor and you say, what's this all about? How come you didn't tell me we Israel? How come you didn't tell me the Jews are black? What other truths have you been hiding from me? What do you mean? What do you mean? If Israel's my homeland, then someone else has my property. That's right. According to the old books, Israel is black. Congratulations, you found the truth. The Jews of Spain and Portugal were black. And if they're black, that means they look like you. However, your excitement quickly turns to sadness and anger when you realize you've been lied to. All this time, people from the church and the so-called historians told you the idea of Israel being black was a lie, made up. However, you found books from the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s describing the Jews as black. as the following reference reads. And it reads, "The Spanish Jew is always dark complexion." 'Tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black, for this is only true of the Portuguese Jews. Located at the bottom, lips very full, mouth projecting, chin small, and the whole physiognomy, the way they look, when swarthy or when black, as it often is, has an African look. Thus, the black color is found not only in individuals as the Black Jews of Portugal. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called. As you can see, Jews were referred to as black, swarthy, dark complexion, and African looking in the old books. So if anyone tells you that black Jews were dreamed up by some guy in Chicago in the 1960s or some black guy in the late 1800s, now you know that that person either hasn't read old books or he or she is intentionally lying to you. And keep in mind, the evidence doesn't just consist of old books. Proof includes paintings from the 1500s. It includes stone depictions of Jews before the birth of the Messiah. It includes skulls of ancient Spanish and Portuguese Jews, which match present-day Negroes. It includes names of black Portuguese Jews found on the transatlantic slave ship Manifest. And it also includes DNA. A comprehensive list of overwhelming evidence can be found in movies such as Hebrews to Negroes by Brother Ron Dalton Jr. and the upcoming Reclaiming the Thrones movie by Moraes to Cole Williams and Josh Cullens.
What is the root issue for that hatred towards our black brothers and sisters? The Lord woke me up kind of in the middle of the night, and he answered that question. And the answer was, because they're my chosen people.
In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to Jerusalem with great slaughter. Many outrages and atrocities were committed against the remainder of the people. It has been estimated that over 1 million Hebrews fled into the interiors of Africa from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Hebrew slaves.
To reconnect to your history, you need to do three things. One, you need to redefine who the children of Judah are according to the old references. Not from the 1900s and newer, because those books tend to have a totally, completely different history in those books. So you have to ask yourself, how did we lose this in history? How did you lose 400,000 people in history? And the reason why I say how did you lose 400,000 people in history is not in the books.
Many people in today's time, many Israelites who don't know their heritage or who they are looking back.
Now it is up to us to have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Hallelujah. Yah willing, this truth will reach the four corners of the earth. The undeniable truth of hundreds of thousands of black Jews in Spain and Portugal, less than 10 years before the start of the transatlantic slave trade. In the very countries who started the transatlantic slave trade. You see, in 1492, a great persecution of these black Jews broke out in Portugal by King John II. This history is undisputed. Now, historians, however, often fail to mention the old books which state that these Jews were black. They were literally called black or Negro Portuguese, which is the Portuguese word for black. Let's see what happens to these Negro Portuguese Jews just before the start of the transatlantic slave trade. The Jews and Moors in Spain, page 214. The King's Creed awoke again simultaneously with the reawakening of his greed. He issued an edict which threw even that of Torquemada in the shade. All Jewish children below 14 years of age were torn from their parents' arms, dragged into the church, baptized. Those under 3 years of age were given to Christians to receive a Christian education, or in other words, to be raised as slaves. Those between 3 and 10 years of age were put on board of a ship and conveyed to the newly discovered unwholesome island of St. Thomas, called the Isles of Perdition, which was colonized by Portuguese condemned criminals to fare there as best they could. Those between 10 and 14 years of age were sold as slaves. Then indeed the cup of their affliction was full to the brim. It was a stern truth which Lanu uttered. The Jews have experienced fully the unequal skill of the church in administering pain. Mothers cast themselves at the feet of the tyrants and pitifully begged to be taken with their babies. They were heartlessly thrust aside. Hundreds of mothers, mad with despair, ran behind the ships as they carried off the idols of their heart and perished in the waves. The serene fortitude with which the exiled people had borne such many and such grievous calamities gave way at last and was replaced by the wildest paroxysms of despair. Piercing shrieks of anguish filled the land. Childless and brokenhearted, they now sought to leave the land, but they were told that they had forfeited their right, and they were given the choice between baptism and slavery. Thousands, after enduring all that they did, after leaving their beloved Spain and all their wealth and ease, submitted to baptism now in the hope of being reunited with their children. Thousands were sold as slaves. Yet, prior to being sold, they were submitted to tortures, cruelties, outrageous, too revolting, too repulsive, too heartrending to be here narrated. Now, just keep in mind that this is less than 10 years before the start of the transatlantic slave trade against the black Jews of Portugal. And it reads, "Terror seized upon the native Portuguese Jews when they helplessly beheld the cruelties to which their Spanish brethren were subjected. They knew then they themselves could not escape the wrath of the church much longer. And they thought of flight, and well had it been for them had they made their escape then. While they were making secret preparations, John II died in 1495. He had been afflicted on the very day when the ships laden with the Jewish exiled children set sail for the Isle of the condemned criminals with a strange, painful malady, and had lingered ever since. His own promising son and successor preceded him into the grave. His cousin Manuel ascended the throne. He was the counterpart of his predecessor, kind-hearted and a promoter of learning, eager to further the interests of his country by discoveries abroad and by commerce at home. Immediately, he disenfranchised the Jewish exile sold into slavery, promised to recall the condemned children, and issued an edict in which he commanded kind treatment to the Jews and prohibited accusations against them. In their great joy, the native Portuguese Jews sent an embassy to him, offering him large sums of money voluntarily as a token of their gratitude. The king thanked them, reassured them of his goodwill, but refused to be paid for human kindness. But again had destiny decreed that a woman was to play an ignoble part in the tragic history of the Jews. A marriage was proposed between Manuel of Portugal and the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain. Manuel was rejoiced with the proposal. Already he saw himself the near future king of United Spain and Portugal and of the entire New World. But Satan stepped between, dipped his pen in gall, writing the marriage contract, demanded as one of the conditions the immediate expulsion from Portugal of all the Jews, both natives and exiles. The king hesitated. The fanatical daughter of fanatical parents persisted. Argument made her more vehement. Torquemada might well be proud of his pupil, the possession of vast empires and of the most powerful crown of Europe, tempted and the tempter conquered. He had purchased his right to the princess of Spain at a sacrifice of thousands and thousands of lives, with the destruction of the very pillars of his nation's prosperity. On the 30th of November, 1497, the marriage contract was signed, and on the 20th of the following month appeared the edict of expulsion of the Jews from Portugal. The scenes of mourning and wailing and heartrending cries which resounded in Spain re-echoed in Portugal, only the more painful because of the terrible knowledge they had since acquired the meaning of the word expulsion. Manuel soon regretted his signing away his most industrious, most intelligent, and most prosperous citizens, but the marriage contract held him fast, and the Spanish queen kept a watchful eye on him, and Torquemada upon both. The prospective vast empire and the Spanish crown still dazzled his eye. He planned a strategy. He thought he could force the parents to embrace Christianity and to remain, if he once succeeded in getting all their children into his power and into the Christian faith. He gave secret orders for the repetition of the atrocious crime of having all children under 14 years of age seized from their mother's bosom and father's arm, dispersed through the kingdom to be baptized and brought up as Christians. The secret became known Portugal again re-echoed the wails of stricken ones. Fanatic mothers threw their children into deep wells or rivers. Mothers were known to take their babies from their breasts and tear them limb from limb, rather than to resign them to Christians. They would rather know the bodies of their children in the graves and their released spirit in heaven than have them adopt a faith into which Satan sent his friends for their schooling. With all the parents' opposition, the king's order was executed. Many accepted baptism, but not enough to please the king, and to wreak vengeance upon them for thwarting his wishes. He revoked his edict and seized all who had not yet fled and sold them as slaves. These black Spanish and Portuguese Jews were placed on the west coast of Africa in great numbers because they refused to embrace the Roman religion. You can find this information in old books such as the one that was written by John Ogilvy in the 1600s, who was the official cosmographer and geographic printer. In John Ogilvy's book, which today retails for around $50,000, on page 574, you can find the truth. And it reads, King John III, King of Portugal, sent a colony there above 200 years before, whom though the unwholesome air destroyed, yet the place was not left desolate. For he sent new inhabitants, who first settled Guinea, next in Angola, and lastly on the island of St. Thomas, that so they might be better used to the air, that the said king sold all those Jews for slaves that refused to embrace the Roman religion, and caused their children to be baptized, from whom, coming there in great numbers, most of the present inhabitants were descended. The black Jews were sent to the west coast of Africa in great numbers, less than 10 years before the start of the transatlantic slave trade. To learn more about the fate of these black Jews, be sure to check out Hidden Hebrews 2 for more shocking truths and evidence. And also check out the upcoming movie Reclaiming the Throne, due out in April of 2020. Now, before ending this video, I'd like to leave you with a scripture from the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. If you ever wondered, what's the most important thing? What's the most important instruction or commandment? Well, let's take a look at the most important thing according to the Messiah himself. Mark chapter 12, verse 28 reads, And one of the scribes, in having heard them reasoning together, and perceiving that he had answered them well, asked him, Which is the first commandment of all? And Yeshua answered him, The first of all commandments is, Hear, O Yisrael, Elohim thy Yahuwah is one. And thou shalt love Yahuwah thy Elohim with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. And the scribe said unto him, Well, master, thou hast said the truth, for there is one Elohim, and there is none other but him. And to love him with all the heart, and with all the understanding, and with all the soul, and with all the strength, and to love his neighbor as himself, is more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. And when Yahshua heard that he had answered discreetly, he said unto him, Thou art not far from the kingdom of Elohim. And no man after that durst ask him any questions. Israel, thank you for watching. Thank you, my brothers and sisters, for your support and prayers. And if you'd like to support via Patreon, visit our Patreon site in the description box below and become a $1 Patreon supporter. Well, stay blessed, my family, and shalom.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
The choice is yours. You can take the red pill or you can take the blue pill. You can find out the truth or you can stay where you are now. The Bible says, study to show thyself approval unto the Most High, a workman who need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. It also says, now these Jews were more noble than the Thessalonians. They received the word with eagerness, but they examined the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Study and examine. Make sure you put in your efforts to find the truth. Please click like, subscribe, and click the notification bell on this channel to stay tuned for more informative videos. Also, there's other channels you can look at. There's We Woke Now with Pastor Kelly Richardson, will give you more information to help you find your path. Also, they're also Brother Benayah Israel. Click on his channel, subscribe, and like. These channels are there to give you information to help you find out who we are, because we are the people of the book. See you next time.
What do you think about this topic? Remember to be a Berean scholar, as it is written in the book of Acts 17 verses 11 to 12. Now the Bereans were more noble-minded than the Thessalonians, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if these teachings were true. It's time to deepen your understanding and see your reflection within the sacred pages. Please like, click subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay up to date with the Berean Scholar channel.